right, we're back for another edition of Sunday Night Astro Live. I am Robert Phoenix, your Sunday Night Astro Liver, and you are you. You are you. Anyway, welcome to the show tonight. Don't know how long we're going to go for. See, we'll go as long as the content takes us to where we need to go. Sometimes it can be 90 minutes. Sometimes it can be 2.5 hours. You never know. You never know once we start to peel the onion. So let me give you a kind of a roadmap for tonight's show. It's sort of a continuum from Friday's show about the chart for the great debate between Candace Owens and Andrew Wilson. And, I tuned into the debate off and on a little bit prior to the start of Friday's show. And my interpretation of the chart for the debate, I think, was pretty spot on. And I didn't want to let the debate cloud my interpretation. But after all the kind of smoke is cleared, I think it meaning the debate turned out the way that I thought it would with the show. And it got me to think about, first of all, Andrew Wilson. And one of the first things that I saw was him on some kind of a live, or I don't think it was anything really long or elaborate. Literally the guy was in his SUV, maybe going to the airport, or I don't know where he lives. But he was in Nashville because that's where Candace lives. And he was on the phone, I think it was maybe, I don't know, FaceTime or something like that with Steven Crowder. And Steven Crowder and Candace Owens have a beef. And they've had a beef for a while. And it goes back to when Steven Crowder was going to go to work for the Daily Wire. And he got into this contract dispute with Jeremy Boring and Ben Shapiro. And I believe at that time Candace had left. And I think Candace wasn't standing up for the Daily Wire people. I could be completely wrong, but I think she was actually standing up for his wife, for Crowder's wife. It's been a while, and it's a bit hazy, right? But I know for a fact that he has beef with her that goes all the way back to that contentious contract thing. So he gets on, I think it's FaceTime or something, and starts talking with Andrew Wilson as quickly as possible. And Wilson was looking a little shaky. He looked a little shaky, sweaty, shaky. And in Wilson's mind, he won the debate. He said, if I had to give myself a rating, I'd give myself a 7.5. And that I had her on her heels the whole time. And I kept getting her to provide evidence for her claims, which she refused to do. And in his mind, he absolutely won. Now, I think that is debatable, because And again, I don't have any dog in this fight. I really don't. Although, if I had to pick one person who was more likable than the other, I would definitely pick Candace Owens than Andrew Wilson. There's too many Andrews. Then Andrew Wilson. I think she's eminently more likable. Now, if Andrew Wilson was a straight shooter and was really invested in the truth, I think he would be interesting. But he's not. He's not. So in his mind, of course, he won the debate. I wouldn't say I think Candace is pretty clear in her mind that she won the debate. And then you have Candace's people who believe she won the debate. Then you have Andrew's people who believe he won the debate. And again, this is what I talked about on Friday. That with that Mars-Neptune square, they were just not going to be able to produce a winner. And the winner would be very subjective, right? A lot of it would be based upon popularity contest, some form of propaganda, right? And so Andrew Wilson immediately just jumps right into it. Like he won the debate. Now, I came to the conclusion that Andrew Wilson has no shame. And it's really funny because I wrote about this over on Twitter. And I think it was Owen Benjamin, about a day or two later, accuses Andrew Wilson of having no shame. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So either Owen Benjamin is reading my tweets or I'm over the target here. And the reason I think he has no shame is laid out in a post that I have over on Substack that I spent most of the afternoon working on. And we're gonna work off some of that post tonight. And I'll show you the post here. Right there. Okay, so this is the post on Substack. I'll probably have to go back through and do this, right? And go back over and do this. So this is the Age of Shame, Chiron in Taurus, or also known as the Hall of Shame. And as you can see, I have 3 individuals. I could put 4 in there if I wanted to. But 3 tends to be the magic number. You have Andrew Wilson. You have Tony Fauci. And of course, on the right-hand side, you have Jason Arday. And we're going to find out all about Jason Arday and how he fits into all of this, right? All of this. And I could put Trump in there, and he's actually in the article. And maybe let's just read a little bit of this, and then we'll come back. And I'll read this as a sort of a starting point. So if you're new here, welcome to the show. We get into mundane astrology. We look at what's going on with the planets, try to make heads, tails over sort of the phenomena in the world and in our lives. And hopefully by the end, you'll have had a few laughs, a few insights, and some good company over in chat. All right, so let me just read a little bit of this here. And again, I didn't even proof this. I probably should have proofed this. I just wrote it and hit publish. On Friday, we were promised the heavyweight bout of this fairly young century when Candace Owens and Andrew Wilson finally agreed to debate at Owens' home in Nashville as she's 7 months pregnant with her 10th child. Of course, I'm being hyperbolic, but the public has known pregnant Owens almost as long as they've known not preggers Candace. That said, how does she find time to raise these children while uncovering the dark truths behind TPUSA, the death of Charlie Kirk, and the lingering case of Brigitte Macron? Don't get me wrong, I like Candace, but I'm still puzzled by her, see, this is what I need to do, by her having and raising multiple children on her schedule. Anyway, back to the debate. Wilson and Owens squared off for nearly 3 hours with Patrick Bet-David playing the role of moderator. And I emphasize playing because I wasn't seeing a whole lot of moderating, just another opportunity for PBD to build his brand. Being attached to a stream with over 3 million views was money in the bank for PBD, provided he didn't muck things up. He didn't, but he also didn't really do much at all. If there was a winner to the debate, it was Bet-David, just by showing up and not drooling. Back and forth it went, Candace asking the questions that Wilson should be asking instead of playing damage control for TPUSA, because that's exactly what he's doing. And everyone knows that. Keep that premise in mind. He's taking money from TPUSA, excuse me, to supposedly train their next generation of debaters. But we all know he's a hired gun. Wilson is a chain-smoking pit bull whose skills at rhetoric are well above average. He arrived seemingly out of nowhere and within 4 years has carved out a niche as a conservative mouthpiece that takes on woke leftist, feminist, liberal opponents with varying degrees of success, but in his mind, never defeated by any of them. And so that story continued after the big debate. Many observers handed Owens a W when Wilson couldn't name all 7 charges against Tyler Robinson. Others claimed that he constantly had Owens on the ropes because she could not offer up claims for her wild conspiracy theories. This encapsulates my issue with debate circa 2026. The most important thing about the debate is not uncovering the truth by cross-examining the position held by your opponent, but winning the debate itself. These two things are mutually exclusive. There are tricks to winning debates, most of which happen before anyone enters the room and sits across from the other person. The terms and conditions of the debate can frame victory or defeat from the onset. And both sides haggled to frame the contest either in their favor. They finally reached on reasonable terms. So this is a link to the show that we did on Friday. Okay, so if you haven't seen it, there's a link in the Substack. And then this is the chart. I spent well over an hour on Friday going over the debate chart on YT. The conditions of the debate weren't great. With the Venus, Mars, Neptune T-square, there would be no clear-cut winner. The Neptune-Mars square creates a highly subjective state. If you're Team Candace, she won. If you're Team Wilson, he won. In essence, there were not going to be any winners from a wholly objective perspective. And yet, after the debate, Wilson was on some sort of live with Steven Crowder, declaring victory, touting all the accusations Owens couldn't directly address. Whether that's true or not is, well, up for debate. But the most salient takeaway I have from the whole fiasco is that Andrew Wilson has no shame. In fact, he is poster child number 1 for living in a shameless society. We'll get to poster boy number 2 in a minute. Wilson shamelessly admits that he's taken money from TPUSA. He can spin it any way he wants, but most of us know that it's blood money. Wilson was hired specifically for this moment to get someone in front of Owens with millions of people watching and not only debunk her claims, but do everything in his power to wreck Owens' career and reputation. This is why Andrew Tate was sitting in that room. This is why he was hired. He wasn't hired to go train Brilliant Hollinghand as the next level of debater for TPUSA. TPUSA is not going to, that ship has sailed. That has sailed. It's not coming back, right? He's not going to have a cadre of young and eager debaters going to hit the college campus trail. Hell, I'm not even sure who's going to be on the college campuses. Do unnaturalized Chinese students really give a shit about debate? The H-1B students now who are there all learn how to be shitty doctors. Do they care about debate? I don't think he's there for that. I think we all know why he's there. He was there to be in that room with Candace, so that not only could he answer all the questions, right? Like, we're going to put this thing to bed, but you're going to bury her. You're going to make sure that when you leave that house, Candace Owens would be effectively disabled, done. And it didn't happen. It did not happen. He may have created some doubt. He may have created enough of a case so that if you were really pro Andrew, you were in, right? Now, I saw some people who were kind of on the fence, and they do think that Andrew Wilson won the debate. But in the grand scheme of things, he didn't. And even if he won, he didn't create enough of a case to completely crush Candace Owens. He didn't. So in that regard, if I was TPUSA, I'd want a refund, because he was able to get to see. I think it was always him debating Candace Owens. That was always part of the plan, right? And then they kind of did this in stages. So he was on Piers Morgan, right? He definitely was on Joe Rogan. And so it's amazing how many people didn't even know who Andrew Wilson was before he got on Rogan, right? So Rogan creates enough attention so that Andrew Wilson says, I want to debate Candace, right? Like he now has kind of enough eyeballs to bring to the table. This was always the plan. Always the plan. Now, there are people out there who will say, well, Joe Rogan's in on it, and Candace is in on it, and Piers Morgan's in on it, and Andrew Wilson's in on it, and they're all in on it, and they're all actors, and they're all just doing this to completely and utterly distract us. And everybody's an actor. You're an actor. We're all actors. We're all actors in the movies of our lives, right? Or is this an organized acting ritual? I don't think so. I don't think Andrew Wilson and Candace Owens are playing for the same team. Now, they may be playing in the same league on different teams, but still in the same league. You understand what I'm saying? Like in the NFL, yeah, you got 32 teams in the NFL. It's a league, but they're different teams. They're still in the same league. Anyway, again, we all knew he was taking their money. He knew that we knew that he was taking their money, and he did it anyway. To think that independent thinking people wouldn't arrive at this conclusion is either flat out stupid, and I don't think Wilson is stupid, or it's utterly shameless, no matter what the outcome, as long as Wilson claims his victory over various social media platforms. That's all that counts for him. Debate is often an exercise in reframing perspectives, questions, and narratives. These are the three advantages to reframing in a debate. Number one, control the narrative. Prevents you from getting trapped fighting on the opponent's preferred ground. Number two, expose faulty assumptions. Highlights hidden biases or missing voices in the opponent's initial premise. And number three, make arguments relatable. Grounds abstract policies in human practical realities that judges or audiences care about. When someone debates for a living, reframing blurs and bleeds into the personal life as well an adjunct of a proven strategy. This is what Wilson is not only doing with the TPUSA money and his version of victory against Owens, but other debates as well. Reframing could also be a tool for a sociopathological behavior and allows a person who should be hanging their head in shame to instead hold their head high with a false pride that would be unpardonable in times when things like character and one's name was of utmost importance. Wilson took the blood money as a hired gun to take Candace out. He knows it. He accepts it willingly, and he does it without shame. Then he claims victory when in actuality, there is no clear-cut winner. He couldn't be okay with a draw. He couldn't concede points to Candace while standing on his own wins inside the debate itself. Andrew Wilson must win at all costs, even if it outs him as a completely shameless tool, which it has. Wilson is endemic to our society, but he's far from alone. So let me spend a little more time before I move on in this piece with Andrew Wilson and why I think he is endemic of our time. So let me say this before I kind of launch into this. It's a shame that Andrew Wilson is not a real truth seeker. I don't think he is. Because if he was a real truth seeker, he'd be really good at it. Right? I've seen some of his debate skills, and sometimes he's actually quite good. I've seen other times in his debate skills where he just gets caught in a trap and starts, flinging ad hominem attacks at people, which isn't very good at all. But if you ask him about any of his debates, I would say he's won them all, right? So in that regard, he's kind of shameless in a lot of ways. So I'm just saying that if he was able to be in a different lane with some of his skill sets, I think he'd be very interesting. And I think he could be a real ally in the quest for truth, but he's not. And I don't know who he works for. I think maybe he's a hired gun. Maybe he's a cutout of the alphabet. I was tossing this back with Lyle Coyote the other day. It's like, for me, he's got like weird kind of Russian vibes. The thing about Andrew Wilson, which is really bizarre, is that he just, came out of nowhere, really. I mean, there were people who saw him on Nick Fuentes' chats. Like he was on Nick Fuentes' chats. I don't know how long ago this was, maybe 2022, maybe 2022. But there's no record of Andrew Wilson. There's no record. And then when you oh, so you were a sniper and you were a master gunsmith in the Army. Oh, yeah. How long were you in the Army for? Well, I don't know. It was a long time ago, maybe about a year or so. I don't know. He's fucking lying. Unless he served under a different name, which is possible. He may not even be Andrew Wilson. We don't know because there's no records of the guy. But people who are in the military, right, they went searching. They went searching for an Andrew Wilson, and they went through a bunch of Andrew Wilsons. They didn't find that Andrew Wilson. So he doesn't really have any military record. And then, of course, he sort of goes sideways and kind of backs out of it a little bit. Well, that was my wife that said that. And, I think she was just talking about, what a good shot I was. But he even said in one of these interviews that he was in the Army for a brief period of time. And then he goes back on it, right? So what is that all about? And then he says, well, one of the reasons why I can, do all this stuff and know all their tricks is because I'm a master mason. Oh, really? You're a master mason? Oh. What is that? The third degree? I guess that's the third degree of master masonry. And somebody asked, well, how long ago? I don't know. It was a few years ago. I was in it for a couple of years. But do we even believe that? I'm not even sure we believe that. I have more belief that he was a mason than he was a sniper and a master gunsmith. Maybe he got master mason and master gunsmith mixed up and confused. Maybe that's Maybe that's the problem. But in any case, there's no record of Andrew Wilson. None. Not only that, but there's about 5 other Andrew Wilsons, one of which is Owen Wilson's brother. And then when you look up Andrew Wilson, doesn't look like him. That Andrew Wilson looks like one of the Geico cavemen. So who is this guy anyway? We don't know. He just sort of he's like a mushroom. He just pops in out of nowhere and starts showing up on these debate shows, and then he's got his wife, and he's got his channel, and then very quickly he gets elevated when he takes money from TPUSA. That is the moment where Andrew Wilson gets sort of thrust into the public's eye. And again, it doesn't take very long for him to start showing up on these other shows. Whether it's Rogan or whether it's Piers Morgan. It's like, oh, Andrew Wilson becoming a household name, sort of. But again, right, I'm not saying that there isn't any substance to his ability to kind of mix it up and debate people. But there is a complete lack of ownership and self-awareness when it comes to him not only declaring defeat or declaring victory, but this whole idea that we're just going to go along with the idea that he's just a debate coach for TPUSA. That's it. We're all just going to go along with that idea. And we saw what he was really about. We saw what his destination was. It was that living room to try to do everything in his power to completely and utterly decimate Candace Owens. That's why he was there. Now, where does Andrew Wilson go from here? That's a very interesting question. Very interesting question. Like I said, if I was TPUSA, I'd want my money back. That's number one. But where does he go from here? It's not like he had, like Candace Owens' head on a pike. I mean, you could theoretically make a case that he might have gotten the better of her because she couldn't answer some of these claims that she was making. And the reason why she couldn't answer some of those claims, because a lot of what happens when we get into places where things cannot be explained, then we have to go by intuition, lateral thinking, and pieces of evidence that line up, but there may be a gap in between. And when you are having a debate, that gap is vulnerable. And I've said this before, it's very hard to argue the conspiracy position in any debate. Very, very hard. Because debates reward hard evidence. Like if you have hard evidence or receipt or something to back up your point, you'll win the point in the debate. The other person can't bring that same kind of evidence because, let's face it, in conspiracy world, the reason that it's a conspiracy is because the evidence is occulted. It's hidden. And I'm not sure to this day if we've ever really solved any meaningful conspiracy, to be honest with you. I mean, let me just go back and look over the last 50, 60 years. Have we uncovered any real evidence around a conspiracy? There's the smoking gun. Now we got him. I'm not saying that isn't there, right? Like there are things that are there. They just have not, like to this day, we still are kind of arguing over Kennedy. To this day, we're arguing over 9/11. To this day, we'll get to Fauci. We'll get to Fauci in a minute. We're arguing over COVID-19, even though that little shit Fauci was there in front of the Senate, right? Was it Congress? Josh Hawley, Congress. In front of Congress. 111 times he took the fifth. Talk about shameless. We'll get into him in a second. But it's very, very hard to sit down and say, okay, this is the reason why this thing happened. And we have all the receipts. I guess the closest that you could come to uncovering a conspiracy in our lifetime would be Iran-Contra. Iran-Contra was all on the table. It was all on the table. And you had the players for Iran-Contra and it was a big conspiracy. Now, did it rise to the level that it should have? No, not at all. But that's one of the issues when you get into debate. Like, it's very hard to hold up the conspiratorial side of it. Because if you weren't holding up the conspiratorial side of it, and it wasn't a conspiracy, you would be debating. It'd be in the realm of knowns, right? And we all know that just because there happens to be knowns around certain things doesn't necessarily make them true, right? The evidence has been fudged. History has been written by the victors, and not everything is going to come out with a solid piece of evidence, i.e. the smoking gun. It just doesn't work that way. So we know that Andrew Wilson, taking his position, he's just going to hit on some things that Candace Owens can't provide. And that is the one weakness in Candace's defense. Now, she did get him on the fact that there are 7 charges against Tyler Robinson, and Andrew Wilson can only name one of them, which is kind of arrogant, right? Like, you would think he would have learned all 7 of them. And again, there are some people who think that Candace left some meat on the bone, that there were certain questions that she didn't ask that could have been asked that might have been a bit more difficult for Andrew Wilson to kind of weasel out of. But at the end of the day, right, to me, he represents a particular a particular brand of shamelessness in our society. And by the time we're done tonight, it's not just going to be Andrew Wilson who is an agent of shame. You'll see plenty more, and I'll walk you through all of it. I'll walk you through all of it. And the thing that makes Andrew Wilson a powerful agent of shame is because he walks around like he has character and integrity, and just, he just wants to set the record straight and put all of these people who are peddling bullshit theories in their place. And do I think he really wants to do that? Not really. I mean, I think he'd like to win. He would like to win. But other than that, I don't know if he really feels that way. And in fact, he kind of reminds me a little bit of a front runner. Front runners are people who, in the sports world, if they have a team and their team isn't doing well, they'll drop their team. And they go, oh, I really like the New York Knicks. I'm a Knicks fan now. Well, when did you become a Knicks fan? Well, when they started winning. And Andrew Wilson kind of reminds me of that. It's very easy for him. He has carved out this position, right? He's carved out this position where he's kind of playing middle of the road guy, right? Middle of the road guy, and Mr. Ontological Evidence guy. And it puts him in most cases kind of on the winning side of things. And I'm not saying that he is a winner. I'm saying that that's how he has kind of sculpted his debate career. Like, he doesn't really debate anything really controversial because he doesn't want to lose. He knows that his currency is based on him being able to win debates. So he's going to pick subjects and content and topics that are going to be, just by their nature, more easily winnable. So if you're a conservative, you'll probably like him. You'll probably like him because he rarely says anything that like drifts off into conspiracy world, right? Rarely. So I think he's shameless. He's totally shameless. He's in it for the money. He was in it for the money from TPUSA initially, and I don't know what he got out of this GoFundMe and this $300,000 bullshit. I don't know what he walked away with. I don't know what he walked away with. But at the end of the day, as soon as he got on with Steven Crowder and started to tout his winning, I'm like, this dude's utterly fucking shameless. Utterly shameless. And then he's got, Crowder, who's stroking him off, in his studio, because Crowder hates Candace Owens. So this is, we're gonna put Andrew Wilson just here for a minute, right? Because this is all happening with Chiron and Taurus. And, I've studied Chiron a lot. And out of just about any planet / planetoid / aspect in astrology, I know more about Chiron than just about any other planet. And the reason why I know so much about it is because I think it's really, really important. And when we go through these chirotic phases, like we are now with Chiron and Taurus, they set the tempo for the time that we're in. And I want to talk a little bit about Chiron. And for some of you, you know the story. For those of you that are new, I'm happy to share the story of Chiron with you. Chiron is the offspring of Kronos and Philyra, and he came into this world when Kronos descended to the earth, and he took the form of a white stallion, so he could copulate with Philyra. Now, Philyra was a nymph, and she was an oceanid, right? She was an oceanid. And once he was able to copulate with her, he splits. He goes back up there. She gets pregnant. Then she has this offspring, and she looks at her offspring, and for her, it's hideous. It's a guy. He's got 4 hooves, and he's got these 2 little arms. He's got the head of a kind of a human head with some horns on it, and she is mortified by this child. It's not a child; it's this life form. And so she beseeches the gods and says to the gods, please, please, I never want to have another child again. Turn me into an inanimate object. And the gods hear her and they turn her into a tree. So that means that Chiron is just sitting there. He's like, what the fuck? I'm abandoned. I have no parents. However, fortunately for Chiron, Apollo and Demeter were not far by. And they decided that they were going to adopt Chiron. So they did. And they hung out on this mountain called Mount Pelion, Pelion. And they were Chiron's teachers. And they taught him everything. They taught him astronomy, astrology, medicine, herbology, music, poetry, warcraft, strategy, agronomy, beer making, you name it. Chiron could do it. He could do it. Baked Alaska, cherries, Jubilee, no problem. Chiron's got it. Anyway, so Chiron becomes like this Renaissance centaur. And over time, he winds up having the heroes from the Iliad and the Odyssey as his students. And he has a very personal relationship with quite a few of them. The one that is perhaps the most famous is the one that happens at the end of Chiron's life. And one of his students was Prometheus. And of course, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and was having his liver pecked out every day. And Chiron couldn't stand it. And he said to the gods, can you please, please, please have me, I'll be there. I'll get on the rock for Prometheus. And they said to Chiron, well, you'll lose your immortality. And he said, I know. I don't care. I'll do it anyway. Right. So Chiron takes Prometheus' spot on the rock that he strapped in, and then Chiron gets his liver picked out. And in that regard, Chiron is kind of a proto-Christ figure, and that he sort of dies for the sins of man, right? And not just any man, but the man who stole fire from the gods, the man who basically broached the realm of heaven and brought the light of knowledge back to the world. That's what Prometheus represents. But along the way, Chiron has a lot of other, journeys and adventures. And, Achilles is one of his students. Of course, we have the story of the Achilles heel with Chiron. And he's a very, very interesting character. But when he is rejected by his mother, rejection is a huge part of Chiron. So we have rejection, we have abandonment, and then we have shame. Those are all 3 conditions that are associated with Chiron. Now, you can get healing through Chiron, but you have to heal all 3 of those things first. You have to heal abandonment, rejection, then ultimately shame. Right? So when we have Chiron in Taurus, which is what we're dealing with now, this whole idea of shame is a very interesting concept. It's a very, very interesting concept because Taurus represents money, right? It represents material goods. It represents sort of our root chakra connection to the world. And it manifests itself in things that are generally concrete, right? That's the nature of Taurus in general. We think of elements, gold, silver, copper, the precious metals. They're all in the second house. They're all in Taurian territory, right? Gems, gemstones, all those beautiful things that we extract from the earth. Like they're solid. They're all Taurian territory. In our economy, which at this time is still based on the Federal Reserve and fiat-based currency, we have cash, we have coins, and those are, for all intents and purposes, solid, right? When we are dealing with resources in Taurus, we're talking about things that are solid. Now, on the other side of the chart, we have Scorpio, which is other people's money, and we have assets that aren't always solid. They're actually quite liquid, particularly since Scorpio is a water sign. So we know what Taurus is about, right? Taurus is about the earth. It's about the earth. It's about things that are related to the earth. And Chiron is, number one, it's the wound. That's number one. It's the wound. It is the wound. It's not always the wounded healer. It is the wound. So it's the wound in Taurus or Chiron, the wound in Earth, or being connected to and or related to the Earth. If you were born in 1976, 1977, you're going to have Chiron in Taurus in your chart, and you are in the midst of going through your Chiron return at the age of 50. Congratulations. Now, we have Chiron in Taurus for a while. It will regress back into Aries and come back again into Taurus. So it's not quite done with Aries yet, but it'll clean up its act in Aries and come back into Taurus. But if you're born with Chiron in Taurus, every Chiron is like a sub-generation, right? Chiron cycles are interesting because they're not always the same. Some Chiron cycles are 7 years, some are longer, some are shorter. But the aggregate of all those years that add up is 50. It's 50 years. It's a Chiron cycle. So at 50, you go through your Chiron return. It's where Chiron was at the time of your birth and the sign that it was in at the time of your birth. And so these sub-generations have sort of interesting things to work out, right? We just came through Chiron and Aries, even though we'll be back there in a minute. We started, if I'm not mistaken, we started this war not war with Chiron and Aries going back into February. You know, those last degrees of Chiron and Aries. Oh, here we go. Here we go. We're off on another conflict, right? And one of the things that we experienced with Chiron and Aries, this is not people that were born with Chiron and Aries. This is what we experienced with Chiron and Aries. One of the things that was, of course, quite big during Chiron and Aries was the Me Too movement, right? So if we were to go back 7 years, that put us around what, like 2019. Oh boy, Me Too was just in big swing back then, right? Big swing, 2019. It was on. It started to happen a little bit before then, but it was really, really happening with Chiron and Aries. The other thing that started to happen with Chiron and Aries was this kind of growing awareness of the war on boys and the war on men. Like that was happening with Chiron and Aries. It was really interesting. I mean, because as an astrologer, I knew it was happening. And also as somebody who, you know, follows these trends, has a son who's, you know, at that time young, and thinking about the future and, you know, watching all the DEI stuff happen. It was, and a lot of it was at the expense of men and young men. And it really reaches it reaches a peak when Trump hits the White House. And then we're dealing with, you know, these, I don't know, these blanket assertions of just toxic masculinity. That's all Chiron and Aries stuff, right? And so men at that time started to wake up. They started to wake up in Chiron and Aries. And they began to realize, shit, I need to get my shit together. A lot of men started to work out more with Chiron and Aries. They started to follow their diets better. A lot of, there are a number of guys who stopped drinking during Chiron and Aries. I mean, these are all sort of the things that were there to quote unquote heal men. And conversely, what was happening on the female front with Chiron and Aries is that there were women who were making a break from the Democratic Party and from being liberal and being progressive into sort of more traditional roles, right? They were shaking off the chains of their conditioning, which is both Chiron and Aries. It's Chiron and Aries. But that all happened during that time. And yeah, were there people who were on the streets and protesting, and were we getting a lot of George Floyd business? Absolutely. Were we getting Antifa? Absolutely. That was all part of it, right? But both things can be equally true with Chiron and Aries. And all those things that were happening on the Antifa front and on the BLM front, it also went into the awakening of people, men and women, but mostly men, who said, we've had enough. We have had enough. And that's how Chiron and Aries began to manifest itself, right? And even in terms of language, people were much more emboldened by the time we were finished with Chiron and Aries, with how they were able to speak, or the words, or the labels that they used in order to say something, right? And free speech was kind of on trial at some point during Chiron and Aries, especially on universities where people were protesting against Israel and Palestine and the boycott, defense, the vest and strike movement, right? The BDS stuff, which they really nipped in the bud. Why? Because they made it very, very difficult for students and universities to allow these protests to occur on campus, right? And a lot of that also is very reflective of Chiron in Aries as well. It was, it was not, we're in some ways we're still dealing with that, and we will deal with it, particularly when it goes back into Aries. But these are just some of the things. Like, I also remember very early on in that Chiron and Aries cycle, it was the beginning of like the CTE movement in pro sports. There was like Uranus and Aries, Chiron and Aries, and this whole idea that that concussions and impact, head-to-head impact, was leading to CTE, which was essentially brain damage, right? That would cause these guys, these pro football players, to kind of lose their shit and go off their rocker. I don't know if they're like, causation isn't always correlation with that, because one of the things that I looked into with a lot of the CTE cases was that many of the CTE guys were also heavy duty steroid users. And I think it's really difficult to look at the damage that CTE did in relationship to, because, when you take a steroid, everything in your body swells except your junk. Your junk actually shrinks, but your head gets bigger. Your head gets bigger when you take steroids. Case in point, Barry Bonds. There's like a Barry Bonds head before he starts taking steroids, and there's a Barry Bonds head after he takes steroids. Now, if that's the case, and you're playing football and you're having helmet-to-helmet collisions, and you got a big noggin, and you've got theoretically, more brain in there to kind of bang around and clang around, well, it makes sense that perhaps the continued use of steroids creates a form of like encephalitis in some ways. And then when you have those high velocity impacts, it's going to affect your head more. And who knows what else it does to the body when you take steroids. It's one of those things where when you just look at, to me, I couldn't believe that these people who were so invested in safety in pro football, again, football is a very airy sport, that they didn't look at the correlation between steroids and the heavy duty CTE victims. One guy by the name of Mike Webster used to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And dirty little secret, those Pittsburgh Steeler teams, the Steel Curtain, they were the first teams in the NFL to start heavily using steroids. That's one of the reasons why they won so much. I mean, they were a talented team, but steroids they not only make you stronger, but they also help you recover much faster from either working out or playing. Let's say you play in Pittsburgh and you're playing a game in late November. I mean, you're going to get banged up and you're going to be sore. Steroids help you recover much faster. Mike Webster, who is one of the poster boys for CTE, was also a heavy steroid user. And he started to have really strange behaviors. And so, yeah, I'm off on a little bit of a tangent. I'm just telling you that you can't just automatically assume that because dudes are banging their heads, that they're going to have CTE. I think there's more to it than that. But again, Chiron and Aries brought it up, right? We were dealing with that exact same thing. We were dealing with like head issues, head injuries, and all related to things like pro football, right? And for people with Chiron and Aries, you're done. You're pretty much done. I guess some of you might have one last go at it if your Chiron's around 27 or 28 degrees in Aries. But all you baby boomers out there, you've gone through your Chiron return. Not baby boomers, I take that back. All you Gen Xers, you've gone through your Chiron return. And again, I think probably what we've seen on the female side, I think we've seen women begin to reject the feminist ideology and become much more conservative, patriotic, more I wouldn't necessarily trad wife, but there's been a movement towards women in that direction. I don't know how old she is, but when I think of somebody like that, I think of somebody like Justine Bateman. She seems like a Chiron and Aries kind of woman. Like she just rejected, Hollywood, and she rejected trying to, change her look or age, and seems very Chiron and Aries. And for the dudes, they decided that they were going to get stronger ultimately, because if you're a Gen X dude and you have Chiron and Aries, you sort of grew up during that that time of the metrosexual. You guys got metrosexual programming, and some of that has to do with Pluto and Libra, like being the pretty boy. But that's like shedding the programming, right? It's like shedding the Johnny Depp programming or the Leo DiCaprio programming, or whatever kind of version, the Rob Lowe programming, right? Even Rob Lowe rejected it. I think Rob Lowe works out like a couple times a day, doesn't drink. He claimed his Chiron, and I don't know if he has Chiron in Aries or not. But now we get to Chiron in Taurus, and we should probably talk a little bit about that before I continue to go on through with the presentation. So let me bring up a chart here, because I do have a Chiron and Taurus chart that I can show you guys. Let's see, where is it? Yeah, it's right here. So let me bring this up. So this is when Chiron was discovered, November 1st, 1977, and we have a time, 10 a.m. Palomar Observatory, Pasadena, California. There we go. There's Chiron at 3 degrees Taurus. So we have theoretically known of this event, or known of this celestial body, since 1977. That's when it began to at least make its way into our consciousness, right? So next year, we're going through Chiron's Chiron return. I think it's exciting. We should have a birthday for Chiron. Next November, we should have a Chiron birthday. We should go celebrate Chiron somewhere. Should we go to Pasadena, the birthplace? Well, at least not the birthplace, but the place where maybe we can hang out with Robert Saphir. Maybe he could be our Mount Palomar. Is he like a guide there or something? I see him drive around that place. Always at Griffith Park. He's always at Griffith Park. Anyway, so we have Chiron and Taurus. Mars was in Leo. The Moon and Jupiter were in Cancer. Jupiter was retrograde. We have the true node in Libra, Pluto in Libra. A lot of Libra. A lot of Libra. Venus in Libra, and then we get into the Scorpio part of the sky with Sun, Uranus, Mercury, and then we have Ceres. And then Saturn is at the 29th degree of Leo, right on Regulus. Look at that, and part of Fortune. And then we have the South Node in Sag. We have, this is really interesting. We have, at this time of day, we have the Ascendant conjunct the Galactic Center. Very interesting. So I think this is a pretty important time. It's a very important time. And so what can we ascertain from this chart? Well, one of the things that we could ascertain from this chart is the fact that Chiron is related to balance. It is related to balance. And not just because of the true node being in Libra. When you look at Chiron in the sky, theoretically, it sits between Saturn and Uranus. So let me see if I can do this. All right, so we have theoretically a whole group of centaurs that are connected to Chiron. There's a whole group of centaurs, or a group of like asteroids, and they all have like centaur names. You know, what do we have? There's Chiron, Nessus, Chariklo, which is Chiron's wife, Pholus. So a lot of these are named after other centaurs. Chiron being the one who has the most pull, right? Has the most pull in the centaur world. So here we go. There's our friend Chiron. Saturn, Chiron, and the centaurs. Right. Okay. So Chiron is supposed to be a mediator between Saturn and Uranus. Saturn and Uranus, because that's theoretically where it sits between, right? Saturn and Uranus. So for most of us, what we have to do in our lives is we are always in this dance between order and chaos. And Saturn represents order and Uranus represents chaos. And most of us in life choose a Saturnian life, although I would say maybe the bulk of you watching this might have gone down a different path altogether. But most people choose a Saturnian path, right? They're going to go to school, they're going to get a degree, they're going to get a job, they're going to marry somebody, hopefully it's the right person, they're going to, upgrade their house, maybe join a country club. That's all very Saturnian, right? This is how life for a long time was crafted, that you lived a life of order, and there was kind of a hierarchy to the order, that you would gradually move up these steps, and eventually you would reach the good life, right? Which would be very Saturnian. Most people avoid, or at least for a period of time, for long, avoid Uranus like the plague. They don't want chaos. They don't want disruption. They don't want creative energy. Most people over a period of time were happy to replicate the recipe for success, or at least what they thought success was, which was ultimately working towards their pension and then traveling and playing golf for their, that's all like very Saturnian stuff, right? But most people at a certain point have to deal with Uranus. And the first time you'll deal with it is during the Uranus opposition, which is what, at 38. So that's the first time you deal with it. It's kind of like a midlife crisis. There's other Uranian transits, but that's really the first one, the big one. And most people, whenever Uranus hits them in their life, if they've taken the Saturnian path, they don't always fare well. They don't always fare well because they've just chosen to play it safe. Like Saturn is playing it safe, and there's nothing wrong with playing it safe. By the way, it's probably the smartest thing to do. Like if you want to get ahead in life, right? If you want to get ahead in life, and you really are playing Saturn to the limit, like you can really ride that train. You could really ride that train. You could advance. You could climb, right? If you're really locked in on the Saturnian path, you can discipline yourself. You can have structure, order, and if you're consistent and you have a reasonably good job, hey, you will elevate. It's just the nature of it. You'll elevate. And so it's not a bad path. And if you have children, honestly, you kind of want the Saturnian path because you want your kids to feel safe, right? And not safe in a way, like, I don't know, the Southern Poverty Law Center safe, but safe in the sense that you're not going to be raising your kids in a weird part of Oakland. That would be unsafe, right? That the house that you're living in is in a good part of town that you can afford, where the kids in that neighborhood will be positive influences. That the school, if you're sending them to school, is a good school and not some poorly rated. So really, what you're doing is you're theoretically building the chances of your children's success through taking a Saturnian path. If you go the Uranian path, a lot can happen, and some of it is not very good. So I understand when people get married and they have children, right? Taking the Saturnian path is probably the way to go. Doesn't always happen that way, though, right? You hear that? Yes, I have heard that. Now, some people, whether they choose it or not, take the Uranian path. So let's say, for instance, you grew up in a broken household and you moved all the time. And your mother had numerous boyfriends. Or let's say you live with your father and he had numerous girlfriends, right? And the only thing that was consistent was being inconsistent. And there are people who live like that. There are people that live like that. Let's say you were raised by somebody other than your nuclear family. Like let's say you're raised by your grandparents or your cousins, or or even, I don't know, you can still have a Saturnian youth if you're adopted. But a lot of times, if you're not raised by your nuclear parents, that can be very Uranian and create unusual relationships inside that family unit. And so there are people that have grown up living very Uranian, and their lives are filled with more chaos than there is order. And for those people, at some point, they have to come to grips with Saturn, right? They have to come to grips with not allowing this chaos that they have accumulated through their upbringing to continue to dominate them through various parts of their. At a certain point, they have to make a shift, and that's Chiron as well, right? So this is this really important kind of factor with Chiron. If you're Saturnian for a large chunk of your life, at a certain point, you have to come to terms with Uranus. If you're Uranian for a large chunk of your life, you have to come to terms with Saturn. So in my case, I was very Uranian. And I've said this before, I was very Uranian. And I didn't get Saturnian until I was 44, and I had the Saturn opposition. That's when I became a father. And I had to learn about some Saturn. Like, it wasn't like I couldn't do Saturn. You know, I worked at a .com. I showed up every day. I worked my ass off. You know, I did the Saturn thing in the workplace. That was not a problem, especially when you like what you do. But then you become a parent for the first time, you become a father. That is some Saturn shit right there. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, okay, I got to be more grounded than I've been in the past. You know, I have to be. And so I had to finally, you know, have a reckoning and then, you know, deal with Saturn. But that was my journey. So I'm just giving you some background on Chiron, which I think is a very, very interesting aspect of the chart. Everybody's got Chiron at some place in their chart. Let's talk about Chiron in Taurus. People that have Chiron in Taurus. So you're going to be born, starting 1976, roughly. 1976 to what, about 1983, right around there? So here's the challenge with Chiron and Taurus. First of all, most of you with Chiron and Taurus, look around and say to yourself, how the fuck did I get here? Who are these people? Who are these people? They're supposed to be my parents? This is my family? I don't know, man. What is this place? What is this earth? I don't get it. I don't get any of it. I didn't ask to come here. You know what I mean? I mean, that to me is, that's like, that to me, that's Chiron and Taurus. Do you know who a real Chiron and Taurus character is? Okay. All right. Hold on. Let me see if I can figure this out. I'm going to see if my timing's right on this. If it is, I'll be thrilled. I'll be thrilled. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Hold on. All right, so I said Chiron went into Taurus in 1976, right? 1976. Now, this might be a little bit early, but I think it's predating. Hold on. I think it's predating. Give me 1 second. It's close. All right. It's probably going to be Chiron in Aries, but I gotta get into this anyway. Yeah. Okay. It's Chiron in Aries, but it will eventually morph into Chiron in Taurus. And it is the comic book Howard the Duck. Howard the Duck. You guys know Howard the Duck, right? Howard the Duck. One of the Howard the Duck comic debuted on January 1st, 1976. 1976. And one of the January 1st, 1976. Marvel attempted to spin off from the short-lived Howard the Duck newspaper comic strip from 1977 to 1978. So that's really in the Chiron and Taurus. Anyway, Howard the Duck's theme was trapped in a world he never made. To me, that is the sentiment of Chiron and Taurus. So it comes out the same year that Chiron shows up in Taurus, just a few months earlier. And that's kind of how Chiron and Taurus operates, right? People say to themselves, well, how did I get here? Who are these people? I don't really fit in here in this world. And then there are the attendant issues that people have with Chiron and Taurus. So if you have Chiron and Taurus, there's probably a very good chance that you suffer from the following: digestion issues and allergies to certain foods, allergies to certain fabrics, allergies to certain scents. All of those things can be very difficult for people with Chiron and Taurus. Also, people with Chiron and Taurus may like intimacy, but they don't always like being touched. There's kind of a unique and I would say bit of a strange affliction to the body. Sometimes people with Chiron and Taurus can have perfectly fine bodies. In fact, I would say even nice bodies. And yet they would not see themselves that way, right? So I think Chiron and Taurus lends itself to a type of dysmorphia in general. Work. People with Chiron and Taurus don't always understand work. Like, what is this work thing? What am I supposed to do with this work thing? Like anything that's related to this planet, this realm, this sphere, that relates to the elements, grounding, your first chakra. Chiron and Taurus is an affliction. And it doesn't mean that you're a lost cause. Don't get me wrong. But the idea for anybody born with Chiron and Taurus is that your incarnational process takes longer than others. Why? Because you're always getting used to new layers of the earth. That's what you're doing. You're getting used to new layers of the earth, or new layers of understanding with the earth. And that is an incarnational process. So it's a really interesting Chiron to have, because I feel like there's just a whole group of people out there who have been really struggling for a long time, just defining who they are in this world. And, and that doesn't mean that everybody with Chiron and Taurus has an issue like that. But I would say by and large, that is what you're going to run into collectively with Chiron and Taurus. And here we are now, right? Chiron is literally in Taurus. And there are plenty of ramifications for it. First of all, let's just look at it from the big picture. How are we doing economically? Remember, Taurus is assets. It's hard money, hard assets. And right now, it feels to me, we got a wounded economy. It's like a wounded duck, like a wounded Howard the Duck. That's what we have. We have a wounded economy. It feels to me like we're fucking bleeding out over here. And this gets into, again, as we go back to the article, this gets into shame and shamelessness. Like when we look at, and Trump and RFK rolled back the vaccine schedule. Well, fuck, thank God. What did they get it down to 11? From 72 to 11? Jesus. So, hey, thank God for that. Okay. I'm gonna give them a win there, barely. But when you look at the Trump cabinet, like they're looting. They're looting. They're using everything in their power to grab as much money and resources as they possibly can, right? Like that is what's going on right now. They are completely and utterly shameless. They're shameless. You have Barron Trump, like he's he's worth over $1 billion now. We just had this weird thing happen with what's his name, Mark Warner, the guy who for a minute owned the LA Lakers and got into some trouble with the SEC. And he was just at the White House recently with the Dodgers, and he gave Trump a World Series ring. And then about a month and a half later, the brother of Trump's son-in-law buys the fucking Dodgers. I'm sorry, the Lakers. Same guy that owns the Dodgers and the Lakers. And there's all this weird funny money coming in from, was it Qatar or one of those fucking places? They're all just trying to offload their money. And so Mark Warner, now this is so weird, right? Like did the SEC launch its investigation because they wanted to shake the Lakers away from Mark Warner? I don't know. I mean, Trump does run the SEC, right? Securities Exchange Commission, like they all answer to Trump, right? So he goes there, he's in hot water with the Lakers deal and the funny money. And then a month and a half later, Lakers are sold. Guy didn't even know the Lakers for a year. And he sells it to Bob Iger and Joshua, what's his name? Kushner. And the funny thing is that they bought the Lakers for $12 billion. And together, Josh Kushner and Bob Iger are only worth about $8 billion. I don't know where they're going to come up with the other $2 billion to buy the damn Lakers. But I guess Adam Silver, Commissioner Nosferatu, doesn't care. But that's shameless. Am I right? It's like if we were to turn the clock back 40 years, we'll just go back 40 years. Who was president 40 years ago? Was it Clinton? I think it might be Clinton. So we're in the, let's just go back to the Clinton era. We'll just call it Clinton era, okay? So let's say we have the Clintons, they're in the White House, and somebody swings by the White House, and they have a meeting with this person, and then 3 or 4 days later, there's a sale of a team, and the sale of the team is going to, I don't know, like Webb Hubbell's brother-in-law or some shit like that. Don't you think that the press at that time would have said, what the fuck is going on here? Like the Clintons have this meeting, this guy comes in, and then a month later, one of their people gets this really, really valuable asset, just kind of out of the blue. Like you would think that at that time, there would have been a fair amount of people like poking around, like, hey, what's going on here? How does this happen? And now it's just how business gets done now. It's completely and utterly shameless. This is what I'm talking about. It's completely shameless. They don't care. They don't care if they're, caught raiding the coffers. They don't care at all because they know that everybody else who is in Washington, D.C. with them, they all know the same thing. And they all want a piece of the pie, just like the Trump crime family does. So they're not going to say shit. They're not going to indict Trump because they want to get theirs as well. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's true. That's what's going on. Let me show you another kind of Chiron and Taurus moment. Let me see. Let me show you. This is all fairly new, right? Okay, so this is I don't know if I'm going to get a strike for this. Okay, so we have a national park here in Texas. We have a national park here. We don't have a lot of national parks, by the way. We have Big Bend, and it's pretty beautiful there. When you think of Big Bend, you think of the Earth, right? You think of Taurus. That's what you think of. You think of Taurus. You got plants. They got the one hot spring that I have been to in Texas is in Big Bend. And what is the Trump administration doing in Big Bend now? Let me show you guys. Yeah, they're going to tell you that this is for the wall. Okay, bulldozers tear through Big Bend National Security for border security project. Here we go.
Crews have started carving a path for what customs
described as a surveillance road along the U.S.-Mexico southern border, heart of Big Bend National Park. That's the entrance right there. Elena Canyon. This is one of the jewel spots of this national park. And that giant cliff, that giant wall you see over there, that is Mexican side of the border. The Rio Grande runs right in front of it and goes for hundreds of miles toward the Gulf of Mexico. And this is a region where the Trump administration is planning a multi-phase project, totaling more than $7 billion. And many people here in this region say that it's simply a waste of money. Pristine wildlife. Look at this. Describe the entire project as insane. Right? Is this not Chiron and Taurus? Stop the steal. I like that. And then the look at this. So the restaurants and hotels are refusing to serve the workers. Right? So this is going on right now. Like, we don't have a lot of beauty in this state. And all of a sudden, they're just going to fucking plow right through it. They're going to bulldoze right through it. Look at that. What does this remind you of? You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of Albania. So is this going to be a resort that the Kushners are going to own? Is that what this is really going to be? A surveillance road. Look at this shit. They'll have to use dynamite. This is, to me, this is cutting right through the heart of the mother. Right here in Texas. That's what's going on. That is what's going on. That's more Chiron and Taurus for you right there. It's just on a physical level, right? Physical level. So, we're having issues with money, the economy. That's all Taurus stuff. Now we're going to have issues with, like what's going on in Big Bend. And, you say, oh, good, fuck those migrants. Like, it's really hard to get through that area. Really, really hard to get through that area if you are looking to get into the United States. And by the way, that's not the biggest threat to migration that this state has seen. No, the biggest threat to migration that this state has seen has been the million or so either Muslim or Indian people that have come through here in the last couple of years on H-1B visas, thanks to Greg Abbott. And again, I don't have a beef with Indian people. I have a beef with Muslim people. I do have a beef when all of a sudden migration happens all at once, because the environment, the culture cannot handle it. It can't handle it. There's no potential for assimilation. And so you just have clusters of people who basically bond together and vote in blocks. And that's the issue. Do you think putting a road in there and completely carving up Big Bend is going to solve our migration crisis? I don't really think so. Right? So we've got economic problems. We got food problems. We have food problems. We did a show last week or 2 weeks ago. I asked people how your gardens are going. Some people are having fine gardens. A lot of people are not. Right? So we've got that. Right? We've got the screwworm in Texas. We've got these ticks that nobody asked for. These are all very Taurus kinds of things, right? They're of the earth. And we're dealing with vulnerability and weakness when it comes to these things. I'll tell you what else we're dealing with, which is going to be a huge issue, and that's the housing. That's the housing market. People are no longer paying their mortgages. I'll bet you there's at least one or two of you out there who have said, fuck it, right? They're not paying. So a lot of banks now are sitting on a lot of mortgages that they can't collect on. And that's another very Chiron and Taurus sort of moment, right? And at some point, they're going to announce that there have been more people defaulting on their mortgages than at any time since the Great Depression. That's going to come. And when that happens, it is going to absolutely hammer the economy. It'll hammer the economy. And whatever value still exists in the housing market, unless you're selling something that's in like the high six figures that a high six-figure person can afford, the housing market is just going to completely and utterly crater. Hello, Chiron and Taurus, right? People who have had homes, who thought they had equity, that they were at some point going to be able to pull the equity out, sell their home, maybe downsize, get a condo, live on, like that's going to be gone. And we're going to see it fairly soon. Remember, Chiron goes back into Aries, comes back into Taurus. I think we'll probably get some of this in 2027. That's my thought. 2027. 2027 is also, especially like around June, July, that's when Jupiter goes into Virgo. Not a great place for Jupiter. It's not a great place, right? It's like expanding all. So Jupiter Virgo, it kind of expands the troubles. I mean, it expands the troubles. It's like we can see like glaring imperfection, like it's everywhere. If you think people are critical now about the world, just wait till Jupiter goes into Virgo. That's going to be huge. Huge. So we have Jupiter in Leo. You may as well enjoy it, have some fun, get a vacation in, right? Chiron goes back into Aries briefly, and then comes back into Taurus full time. We've got issues. We got food issues. We have the cost of food issues. We got housing issues. We've got defaulted mortgages. We're going to have defaulted car payments. We got credit card payments. People are going to start to default on all these payments. People are going to default on this shit. And this is all Chiron and Taurus. This is the inability to meet the basic fundamental standards of the material world, which is just paying your bills, let alone investing in things, just paying your bills. People are going to say, okay, I have to make a choice. Am I going to pay for this, or am I going to pay for food for my family? That's what it's going to come down to. And we're going to see this in Chiron and Taurus. And I feel like this next set, it's an 8-year stretch. But it's going to be, I think, one of the more difficult periods for us economically. If you go back to 1977, when Chiron was discovered, the fucking end of the 70s were brutal. I mean, the entire 70s were brutal. But by the time Jimmy Carter gets into the White House, which is 1976, and he gets Paul Volcker as the head of the Fed, we're dealing with like 15, 16% interest rates. They're awful. Absolutely awful. It is the beginning of the end of Detroit. They start to make a bunch of shitty cars because all of a sudden now they've got to, deal with all these emissions. And we begin to see the end of factory towns. They start to close in the 1970s. You have steel towns that are closing. You have towns that produced things like refrigeration. They're closing. They're all closing. They're closing. And they're closing because they're getting ready to move overseas. That was already in the plan. That was part of the the operating manual, that at a certain point, manufacturing in this country was going to be done. It was going to be done and over with. There was a guy, his name is Jack Welch. I'll bring him up here for you. He's a part of our story. He's a part of the Chiron and Taurus story. Jack Welch was the former head of GE, and Jack Welch would be the equivalent of he'd be the equivalent of the devil, right? He would be the equivalent of the devil. Why was Jack Welch the equivalent of the devil? Well, I'll give you. Let me see if I can find his chart. I'll give you the reason. Some of you already know why, but for those of you who don't, Jack Welch, astrological chart. Let me just get here and do this. So Jack Welch, he's born as a Scorpio, November 19th, 1935. Keep that in mind. November 19th, 1935. So this is Jack Welch's chart. And I'll tell you where he plays a role here. So Jack Welch's chart is right here. Okay, so there he is. So he's a Cap rising, true node in Cap, Mars in Cap. On the Scorpio side, he's got the Sun at 26, Mercury at 14. He's got a Scorpio midheaven. And then down here, right there, what do we see? Well, we see Uranus in Taurus retrograde. So what was Jack Welch's claim to fame? Jack Welch wrote a book, and up until the time he writes this book, the whole idea around corporate culture in America was that corporations were tasked with, one, creating a good product. That was number one. Having service to service that product. So customer service, maintenance, right? 3, providing jobs. That was another important component of corporations, providing jobs. 4, if the corporation or factory was in a town, it contributed to the economy of that town. So all 4 of those things kind of had to be met by a corporation for it to be sustainable and healthy. Profitability was part of it as well. You had to be profitable in order for all those other things to exist. Jack Welch changed everything. Jack Welch said, as a corporation, we don't have to be beholden to our employees. We don't have to be beholden to the corporate town that we have built our companies in. We don't have to be beholden to anybody except our shareholders. That's it. Our shareholders. And people in the business world start to hear this. It's like, oh my, this guy's the fucking Pope, right? And it begins this sea change. And all of a sudden, things start to really drift. Quality goes away. The devotion to the workers or the workforce and the workers being a part of a company town, or it all goes away. It all goes away under the auspices of profit. That's it. Jack Welch becomes this prophet of profit. And in the 70s, when Chiron goes into Taurus, we begin to see the beginning of the end. That's why I'm talking about Jack Welch. And what's interesting is, remember when we discovered Chiron, right? We discovered Chiron, or it was discovered in when? November, right? Chiron was discovered in November. We got the Chiron chart November 1st, right? Jack Welch, when is he born? November 19th. Jack Welch is a Scorpio. And where was Chiron at the time? It was discovered. What was that? 3 degrees Taurus. And all of a sudden, we look at Jack Welch's Uranus, and it's right on top of Chiron. Now, you could say, well, geez, it could have been anybody born around that time. Yeah, but not everybody's Jack fucking Welch. The Sun, Mercury, Midheaven, General Electric, one of the biggest multinational corporations in the fucking world, right? It's like at the top of the pyramid. So when Jack Welch says, all we got to do is be accountable for our shareholders, nothing else matters. And I think you would expect something like that from somebody who has the true node and the ascendant and Mars in Capricorn. Like, that is a brutally efficient motherfucker. That's all he cares about. All he cares about. And that's what happens. So we get into this, you see, in 1977, Jimmy Carter's been president for 1 year. The dismantling of industrial America begins to take place. That's what happens. That is what happens. And so by the time we start to roll into like the Clinton era, which again will not take place for another 17 years, 1994, they're already planning NAFTA. Right? They're already working on NAFTA way before Bill Clinton steps into office and just signs it. Like, he just sat down, oh, yeah, okay, NAFTA. No, they're working on it way before then. Yeah, I'm sure they were working on it back here in the 70s, because that's when the dismantling of American industry starts to take place. It's all Chiron and Taurus. And this dude, Jack Welch, right here, right there, he's got his Uranus right on Chiron. Right there, smack on Chiron. So this is another byproduct of Chiron and Taurus, is the reshuffling of the economy. And we're going a lot, and this is going to hit a lot of people. This is going to hit a lot of people. By the time that we're done with Chiron and Taurus, I just, we're going to be in a very different place. I could see where, 7, 8 years from now, when Chiron goes into Gemini, we'll have 2 separate worlds. At least 2. We'll have a world where there are people who will have agreed to be a part of the systems that predicate that world, and there are people who can be outside those systems. That's Chiron and Gemini. It'll be like the split of worlds. Could you say, well, okay, well, could some people ascend and some people still be here? And I don't know, maybe. I just saw a video of a guy who was sitting at a bar somewhere in, I think, Scotland or Ireland or someplace like that. And the fucker just disappeared from his bar stool. That was freaky. Anyway, this is what's going to happen. And even things like data centers, they're part of the Chiron and Taurus discussion. Data centers take land. Data centers take resources. Data centers are going to occupy thousands and thousands of acres of pasture land, which will not be able to be returned to pasture land once they're done. That is wounded earth. That is Chiron and Taurus. Do you see where all this is going? So for you folks that have Chiron and Taurus, you're going through your Chiron return. Well, this is your time, right? This is your time to step up. There's no more waiting for the incarnating. It's now time. It's go time. So let's get back to the article. I wanted to just give you guys a bit of a background with Chiron and Taurus. So let's go to the article, because we have another part, a very important person here, who is part of our discussion around shame, which again is very Chiron and Taurus, right? All right, so we're back here, and we're going to go to right there. So there we are, right? This is back where we started. Let me introduce you to Jason Arday. Jason Arday. I'll just read this final paragraph here. Wilson took the blood money as a hired gun to take Candace out. He knows it. He accepts it willingly, and he does it without shame. Then he claims victory when in actuality, there was no clear-cut winner. He couldn't be okay with a draw. He couldn't concede points to Candace while standing on his own wins inside the debate itself. Andrew Wilson must win at all costs, even if it outs him as a completely shameless tool, which it has. Wilson is endemic to our society, but he's far from alone. When shame enters death. It wasn't that long ago when Jason Arday was the black diamond of English academia. His background story and his rise to being a Cambridge professor, amongst other schools, and a leading civil rights figure was the stuff made for movies. Think of the Blind Side biopic of the football player Michael Orr, but add a level of Rain Man and Helen Keller to Arday's early life. And while the odds were enormous, not only did Arday overcome them, he crushed them. The only problem with Arday's amazing tale of endurance and hidden genius is that it isn't true. He not only lied about very specific physical conditions he had as a child, but also plagiarized works that helped catapult him into the rarefied air of English academia. Arday's supposed early struggles. From Wikipedia, some statements Arday made about his life were called into question by different media. Arday said that at age 3, he received a diagnosis of autism, global development delay, deafness, and dyscalculia, and was nonverbal until the age of 11. Some schoolmates at Heathbrook Primary School, interviewed by the Daily Telegraph, had varied recollections. One stated he definitely wasn't a mute. And a childhood neighbor said Arday spoke all the time. However, this account is disputed by a close childhood friend who said reporters saw quotes that would match their storyline from people who were not even in his class or close to Arday. Okay. A speech professional who worked with Arday when he was young said his claims were false. He also said he could not read or write until he was 18, and that he received a diagnosis of dyslexia in his first year of university. 3 experts on autism and speech said that Arday's path from being nonverbal to a PhD had no precedent in clinical literature. There's always one, right? 1 in a million, could be him. And that's just his background, which is already patently false. His story, which has been under scrutiny for some time by other academics, got blown wide open on July 24th when Nathan Kofnes wrote a Substack post on Arte that blew his cover to the point where the Daily Telegraph picked up on the story and took it to the next level. Kofnes is an interesting character. He's an American by birth, having been born in Chicago, whose main academic thrust has been deconstructing meritocracy in academia. Kofnes's broad thesis is that most Black professors have not arrived at their position due to merit, but social programs and societal attitudes that have been created to uplift and advance them. Without help, Kofnes believes that Blacks would not be represented in academia, but would be relegated to sports and entertainment. Kofnes took all of Arde's works and fed them through an AI, which linked almost all of them to some other work where Arde lifted entire sections word for word or spent some time in rearranging the ideas by inserting his own language. Again, from Wikipedia. Media outlets reported allegations that Arde's work showed evidence of plagiarism. Investigators identified many passages in Arde's PhD thesis that appeared to replicate a text from 2009 dissertation by Paula Zwodziak-Myers, a reader at Brunei University. Arde's 2018 article in Social Sciences was also reported to have many passages taken from an article by Anjan Memon. Further questions were raised about the possibility of falsified research. Investigations suggested that statements that Arde claimed had come from his research informants had actually been copied from Mermon's article. Not only was Arde's scholastic work under fire, but his claim that he ran 30 marathons in 35 days to raise money in 2010 were also debunked. His entire identity was unraveling in a very public way. Okay. So this guy, what are we going to call him? We'll call him, I don't know. Billy Vanilli, right? He's like the Milli Vanilli of scholasticism. He's a phony. He's a complete phony. You know, it's like he could have been the third member of Milli Vanilli. And what people have pointed out here through not just him, but there are other academicians who've been promoted because they fit a certain demographic. And they were happy to continue to promote this guy. And what do you think his what do you think his subject matter was all about? Racism and colonialism. Everything that he wrote about, taught, what was on a number of boards with, was all about racism and colonialism and the difficulty of being Black in society. And yet, let the record be known that he went a long way without ever having to prove that his work was completely authentic. And the same society that he was critiquing and accusing of being inherently racist and prohibitively colonialist was the same society that advanced him, that looked the other way, that didn't necessarily mind whether or not he was a real scholar or not. Interesting, isn't it? It's almost like they were assuaging their guilt by allowing Jason Arde to create such a fanciful tale. But too many, it hit too many people. And we're living in this time now where, the truth is going to come out with stuff. It just is. And again, this is very Chiron and Taurus, right? There is a time, and look, other people have plagiarized a bunch of shit. I remember when Joe Biden was running for president, it was either 88 or 92, one of those years. He totally fabricated a speech by somebody from England. Joe Biden was a plagiarist. Martin Luther King was a plagiarist. Plagiarism is not widely accepted, but it's widely practiced. Widely practiced. And this guy couldn't even launch his own papers. He did not have an original thought. Now, you could concede the fact that he was clever, but he wasn't clever enough. Even when he found like a paper from somebody in Brunei, like, look, we live in an age now where that shit is traceable and trackable. And that got him in hot water. Now, what's interesting about Jason Arday is that he happens to be a Taurus. And what have we been talking about? We've been talking about Chiron in Taurus. Now, he doesn't have Chiron in Taurus, but his sun is in Taurus, and it's about 6 degrees away from Algol. I don't know how now here, we got to continue with this story. Okay. We're down here. Arday's entire career and public standing was built on a flimsy foundation, held together by a network of liberal deniers in English academia who likely knew that his past could not hold up under intense scrutiny. Well aware of these circumstances, they even tried to cover for him with the usual accusations of racism hurled at Arday's critics. It wasn't enough. 2 days ago, he took his own life, leaving behind a wife and 2 children. He was 41. Do you know why Jason Arday ended his life? Shame. Right? The same shame that Andrew Wilson seems to not suffer from in one iota consumed Jason Arday. Consumed him. He would have had to tell everybody, that his life was a complete and utter falsification. Everything. He'd have to look into the eyes of his wife and tell her that he lied about everything. He'd have to tell his children that he lied about everything. And yet, it probably could have been the single most important function of his incarnation. And one of the things that we generally like here in this world is a comeback story. We generally like comeback stories. If Jason Arday had admitted everything, he'd already stepped down. He admitted everything, and he could have said, I have to take some time off. I have to be with my family. There's a lot to talk about and some healing involved. And, it's going to take me a while to rehabilitate my life, my reputation. But God willing, I'll be able to get through this major trial and you'll see me again someday. And I'll be a better person for this. Couldn't do it. It was overwhelming. The shame overwhelmed him. Shame is a big fucking deal. Let me tell you, man. Most of us have some degree of it. And until, and the cure for shame is to not be shameless. That's not the cure. That is not the cure for shame. The cure for shame is being accountable. Being shameless just exacerbates it. He was ashamed over the fact that he lied, cheated, and got caught. Having to come clean to his wife, children, and supporters was just too much. This might come across as controversial, but his actions were commensurate with someone riddled with that level of shame and subsequently guilt. Could he have come clean and had a press conference and admitted to the lies of his past? Would his wife accept him? Would his children shun him? We'll never know. He removed any chance of redemption by taking his own life. He was overcome by shame, unlike Andrew Wilson, who is as shameless as it gets. And unfortunately, our society supports the Andrew Wilsons of the world. Let's look at a few examples of complete and utter shamelessness. Shame for all. Tony Fauci, I believe it was him, went before Congress and pleaded the fifth 111 times. This was a man who lied to us again and again and again. You don't need the masks. Well, after looking at the data, it might be best to double up on the masks. No need to immunize the children. Everyone needs to get vaccinated. It didn't matter what the narrative was. He had no shame on contradicting himself and has never once apologized for his pharmaceutical doublespeak. Tony Fauci has no shame. No shame whatsoever. He was a shameless promoter of the vaccine. He was a shameless promoter of the measures that created separation, that split up families. He was absolutely and utterly shameless, particularly when he got the star treatment and was journaling about, all the famous people that he was hanging out with, and how Design Magazine came over to his house and took a picture of him out by his pool, sitting on his deck wearing some cool sunglasses. Right at that point, any shame that he might have had was completely and utterly blotted out by the reflection of his own son. He was totally shameless, and to this day, he still is. He's totally shameless. He went in front of everybody and 111 times said, I will take the fifth. Now, if he had any accountability whatsoever, if he could somehow get in touch with his shame, he would have answered all those questions and he would have said, you know what? I made a lot of mistakes during that time. A lot of mistakes. And I feel absolutely horrible for America and the Americans whose lives that I feel very responsible for. Wow. Wow. Like something like that could absolutely, utterly save Tony Fauci's soul. And again, I think it was him. I don't think it's somebody in a mask. The real Fauci's dead. I don't understand what that accomplishes. But that could have been a complete and utter game changer. Would he have gone to prison? I don't know. But I'll tell you what, the guy can never really show his face in public anymore. He's forever ashamed. He may as well have said, I'm guilty 111 times by taking the fifth, because everybody knows he's fucking guilty. Everybody knows he's a liar. He knows that everybody knows he's a liar. It's the same thing with Andrew Wilson. Everybody knows that he knows that everybody knows that he took that money from TPUSA as blood money. No shame. Tony Fauci knows that everybody knows that he's lying. No shame. And people, unfortunately, are rewarded for it. And I'll show you more. Parents receive pictures of what appears to pass for food on the USS Lincoln from their sons and possibly daughters who've been deployed at sea for nearly a year. Since Iran has made U.S. naval bases in the region, rubbles of melted steel and dust, the Lincoln doesn't have the liberty of docking in Qatar, the UAE, or Dubai, where they're at risk for being targeted by Iranian drones. And even if they could get through those facilities, no longer in working order. The closest base to restock the Lincoln would either be Italy or Portugal, since Spain isn't the safest harbor. And yet, when asked about the situation with the Lincoln, Trump says there's no issue. Our soldiers are the best fed and most taken care of any fighting force in the free world. Asked about the unusual length of deployment for the Lincoln, Trump said it's nothing and they should be deployed even longer. Those are his words. Now let's take a look at the fine food here. Talk about some Chiron and fucking Taurus, right? Is this the menu of the future? Is this what we all have to look forward to? Well, what do we have here? We got what looks like maybe a tortilla and I don't know. It looks like some beef cheek or something. That's it. I don't see any beans. I don't see any rice. I don't see any salsa. That's it. What about this feast over here? Well, you got some carrots. What is that? Like black rice? And what the hell is this? I don't know what this is. This looks scary. Absolutely scary. I can tell you what this is. It is some kind of a patty. And this looks like it might be coleslaw. Over here, oh, that is a fine looking breakfast. You got 2 eggs and this barf looking substance is probably oatmeal. Oh, here it's Asian night aboard the USS Lincoln. We have a skewer of beef, maybe a satay, and a little bit of rice. This is what they're eating. These are the pictures that were sent to the parents of the USS Lincoln, who had a big meeting in San Diego and met with an admiral in the Navy, and they nearly burned the fucking place down because they are getting these pictures. They're receiving pictures of their, I think they're mostly males, who are losing weight like crazy, and they've been deployed for 9 months. And then we have Donald Trump essentially lying about the condition of the food and how our Navy is one of the best navies in the world, and he's so proud of them, and we treat them incredibly well. Like, would you feed your dogs this stuff? I mean, this is like just a slight grade above dog food. And the reason why this food is so bad is they can't get food at sea. Normally, they would be able to go into those places like, Qatar and the UAE and Dubai, all those places, right? And they'd park their ships, they'd fill up with supplies, and they'd be able to eat. They don't have that now. They don't have that. And so they have meat that's brought in. The meat is frozen, and when they unfreeze the meat, some of it is rotten. By the time the milk gets there, it's sour. Like, the conditions are deplorable. And it's not just on this ship, but it's on other ships as well. Right? And so now we have a president who is touting the conditions of the crew as being some of the best in the world. This is somebody who has no shame, right? Like, he can't even look into the fucking camera and say, I've seen some of the pictures coming back from the USS Lincoln, and I'm actually appalled by what they're eating, and we need to do something about it, and we need to do something very quickly. Because I'll tell you what's going to happen. They're going to lose the morale of these guys. They already are. They're going to lose the morale, and they're not going to want to fight. And if and when they get back and they are redeployed into the civilian ranks, what are they going to do? Do you think they'll be good soldiers? Do you think if we got into a conflict with the powers that be, that these guys would remember how great they were treated? I don't think so. I don't think so. Some people think that this is like a psyop, right? To see just how much they can push these guys and what they'll be able to take. I'm sorry, but if you really wanted to create a psyop and try to figure that out, you would have had like a private mission somewhere, right? You would have sent some dudes out past the Falklands for months, right? And just had a small control group. That's all you needed. You didn't need every fucking ship in the U.S. fleet running low on supplies and rations. The normal feeling of True about the terrible conditions, horrible conditions on the Lincoln would be one of shame. Wouldn't you be ashamed if you were the president of the United States? Right? You're the fucking commander in chief. Wouldn't you be ashamed of this shit? I would. And yet he's not. Now, maybe privately is, but that doesn't do us any good. And in fact, he insults the families by saying, well, they should actually be deployed longer. He says this. Look it up. The food looks rancid and pitiful. So sailors are losing weight. And this is a president who prides himself as being the greatest president ever, and that America is the gold standard for the rest of the world. In this instance, it's not. A leader shown how those sailors are being treated would take it personally. Again, they would be ashamed, right? Not Donald Trump. Another example of a shameless figure who is openly lying on a nearly daily basis with little retribution. Why? Because the entire system is built on shamelessness. That's why. That is why. That is why Howard Lutnick and everybody else can completely just loot, unimpeded, Jared Kushner, flying around the world on taxpayers' dimes, doing side deals while he's doing the Abraham Accord. His brother coming into D.C. for a weekend after Mark Warner had gone to D.C. With the Dodgers, had a little bit of a problem with the SEC, gives Trump a World Series ring, and now Jared Kushner's brother is part owner of the LA Lakers, even though he and Bob Iger don't have enough money to buy the fucking Lakers. It's shameless. Absolutely and utterly shameless. And it goes all the way down into the realm of influencers. We have absolutely shameless influencers. People like Benny Johnson, shameless. Absolutely shameless. Ben Shapiro, shameless. Mark Levin, they're all shameless. They don't have an ounce or iota of shame in their body. None whatsoever. And the system runs on it. It runs on it. There's a covert agreement between people. And it doesn't stop there. Like, it goes way down. Right? We're inundated with videos of shoplifters and dine and dashers, all fitting the same profile and stealing without any conscience or shame. Almost all of them receive light reprimands when caught and released after being assigned a small fine, which they may or may not pay. They are shameless. So we have people right at the top, right? You got the cream skimmers at the top. And then you've got, like, below that, you've got some influencers, you've got people that are in on the grift, Andrew Wilson, he's in on you got all these people, like, at a governmental level, they're in on the grift. You've got Hollywood, they're in on the grift. You've got the press, they're running on the grift, and they're all shameless, right? And then it just trickles down. You get to a street level, and boy, those motherfuckers are shameless as well, aren't they? You think that the shamelessness would just be consigned to people who can get away with it because, them and their cronies are making a ton of money and they're shameless about it. Well, no, it goes all the way to the street level. None of these people have any fucking shame. None at all. They'll bring their kids into a Walmart. They'll start ripping it off right in front of the kids. They don't care. They absolutely don't care at all. And then, we haven't even gotten into like, the openly brawling culture that we're in, and people losing their minds over, not having enough, having to pay extra for their sauce or their fucking chicken wings. Like they're ready to tear a place down. They're ready to go to blows. They're ready to go to jail because they're going to keep it real. They're completely and utterly shameless. At a certain point, right? At a certain point, people, like, that was the worst thing you could do, was to bring shame upon your household. That was the worst thing you could do, to bring shame upon your family name. And families went out of their way, to make sure that their kids didn't do that. I was not a model citizen growing up. I got cuffed around a lot because my father didn't want me to bring shame upon our family. I kind of like managed to hold together for the most part, right? But I understand it. And it was one of the worst things you could ever do. Back in the day, let's go back 60 years. 60 years, 70 years. If you were in a small community, let's say you lived in a town of about 3,000 people, which 60 years ago might have been a pretty good population. If you brought shame upon your family, you know what happened in that town? They would shun you. They would absolutely shun you. And then they would begin to shun your family. And that's why people did not indulge in shameful acts, because it would have an impact, a huge impact, immediate, on their family and even the future of their family. So I talk about this here a little bit. It's a condition that runs through our society like a cancer. And while Jason Arday's actions might have been a tad extreme, in a healthy world, that's what people who are overwhelmed with guilt will do. It's true. If they're overwhelmed with guilt and shame, they will take their lives. They will take their lives. What do you think they do in Japan? I mean, you bring shame upon your household in Japan, give them the sword. It's called seppuku, right? Judas hanged himself due to his shame. Arde certainly wasn't the first, but in today's messy matrix, he seems to be an outlier. He does seem to be an outlier because, could he have gone about it differently? Maybe. But at the end of the day, he was ashamed and he couldn't face himself. And unfortunately, that's what people do. I'm not saying it's good or bad or right or wrong. It is a byproduct of the condition. And you could say, well, he was bullied in this and he was bullied in that. And no, it doesn't work that way, right? He built an entire career on a series of lies, big lies, big lies. And when he was confronted with those lies, he couldn't handle it and he took his own life. The lost art of shunning. Back in the day when someone committed an act of shame in a village or town, they were shunned. No one would speak with them or do any sort of business with them. In many cases, they were forced to leave where they lived and hope they could rebuild their lives in a town or city far enough away so that they could find a populace that could accept them. Quite often, a name change would also take place. Ironically, California and Los Angeles in general would become ground zero for remaking one's identity, which is true. A lot of people who experience some degree of shame eventually wind up in California and Los Angeles and take on new names and become actors, actresses, musicians, and cult leaders. Chiron and Taurus. It took a few paragraphs for us to get here. So some of this we'll already have gone over. Chiron went into Taurus on 6/20/26 after what seemed to be an eternity in Aries, including a brief retrograde back into Aries. Chiron will be in Taurus for 8 years. my work on Chiron in the individual chart has led me to this phrase. It's when the individual falls out of Eden. What I mean by that is the degree of Chiron in the individual's chart plus minus a year on either side is when reality crashes. And it would be associated with Chiron, reveals itself in a very direct way. I have to clean that up a little bit. The wound itself is always there informing the individual, but the Chironic crisis is like a brick to the head. The Chironic crisis is the degree of Chiron, give or take 1 degree on either side, because we have to account for the retrogrades of Chiron. So if your Chiron is at 14 Taurus, right, your Chironic crisis would have occurred between the age of 13 and 15, somewhere in there, right? So you want to look back at that time and see what happened to you in your life. And I would say that around 90% of the time, this formula for Chiron is a very workable formula. There are some exemptions to the rule. Some of those exemptions are when Chiron is at a very small degree, 0 through 3. And a lot of people just don't remember that. So that percentage, now some people will. And in some cases, like let's say, for instance, you're born at Chiron 0 Taurus. Wouldn't be out of the question that at birth you might have had the cord wrapped around your throat. Right? That could very easily happen with Chiron and Taurus, like right at 0, because you're being born, like 0 is being born, right? And so you're dealing with Chiron, you're dealing with Taurus, you're dealing with the throat. That would not be uncommon. We get to like 2, 3, memory starts to play a little bit of a role there. But that's the Chironic crisis, plus or 1, plus minus 1 year on either side of the degree of Chiron, right? The whole concept of shame is biblical unto itself. Whether you are a true believer or a skeptic, we all know the story. Adam and Eve are living in perfect harmony. All of their wants and needs are taken care of by the Creator. The Garden of Eden is portrayed as a world without a will. It's true. In looking at it from an astrological perspective, this worldview or Edenic cosmology represents the sign of Aries. When the whole idea of Eden is completely Aries. Everything is connected to a primordial whole. There is no subjective thought whatsoever, right? There is this oneness with creator and creation, but there's also a sense of not being aware. And you see, when you're born, right, unless you're very, 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 very special and very aware, most people don't have any memory of who they are up until maybe about 2.5. Now, some people do, but not everybody does. Most people don't. And by the time you're 2.5, guess where you are? You're in the second house, which we're going to talk about here. So being in Eden is like being in Aries in the first house. You're part of this primordial whole. And again, it's a metaphor, okay? The Garden of Eden is portrayed as a world without a will. In looking at it from an astrological perspective, the worldview or Edenic cosmology represents the sign of Aries. In Aries, our will and the will of the Creator are indistinguishable. It is all one, primordial will made manifest in goodness until, of course, Eve listens to the serpent, eats of the fruit of knowledge, and the whole thing goes to hell. Adam and Eve realize they're naked and they are ashamed. Shame is the first realization that the first realization that something had gone wrong. I got to figure that. Shame is the first realization they had that something had gone wrong. And it's true. Awakening to the nakedness of the body and the stark realization of the natural world, where the elements are now a factor and the naked body must be clothed, and somehow Shelter must be built in the garden. Think about that. They're like, we're naked. You're naked. Oh my God, we're ashamed. We're cold. We need to, we need a hut. Let's huddle. Jason Arday just happened to be a Taurus at 18 degrees, just 8 degrees off Algol. Yes, that's a conjunction. Candace Owens also happens to be a Taurus as well. So of the figures that we're talking about, there are 2 of them that happen to be Taurus. Andrew Wilson is a cutout. If I had to guess his sign, it would be Gemini. Chiron and Taurus will usher in an age where shame will gain both power and momentum. I am not a huge believer in karma, but I do have some faith in universal balance. If we look at Taurus, the opposite sign is Scorpio, which is theoretically symbolic of the serpent. Scorpio is the temptation in the garden. It is the driver behind the act of shame. Adam and Eve would go on to have, 2 children, brothers, right? Not 2 brothers. Abel and Cain. And now we're on the 3rd sign of the zodiac, Gemini. And oh yeah, one of them gets killed. Hello, Scorpio. So when you look at Adam and Eve and the biblical story, it starts off Edenic, right? Everything is part of this primordial whole. That's Aries. Then it moves into Taurus because they eat of the fruit and they all of a sudden see that they're naked, they have bodies, and they are ashamed, right? They are now like in the physical world. They were always in the physical world, but they were in this other world where they were part of some whole, right? Like they were all God at that point. And then they theoretically split away from God, and now they were naked. And then they have 2 kids, right? And they're both brothers or Abel and Cain. And now, so we go from Aries to all of a sudden waking up in shame and naked. That's Taurus. And now the 2 brothers come in, and that's Gemini. So from Eden to Abel and Cain, we have created basically the first 3 signs of the zodiac. And then, of course, the next sign is going to be Cancer. And that is when we begin to have the stories of the begat, the begat, the begat, the begat, the begat, the begat. That's all Cancerian stuff, right? It's all Cancerian. And so that first group of people are part of the begatting. Okay. So here we go. But it's this feeling of waking up in Eden, naked, that Chiron and Taurus will bring with it. Systems that have been secure aren't. The money supply dries up. Credit card debt goes through the firmament. People will exhibit behavior for money and goods that will make OnlyFans look parochial. And at the center of it all will be shame and shamelessness. On the plus side, we'll see more and more characters whose story doesn't hold up. Whether it's Andrew Wilson, Jason Arday, or Donald Trump, shame will enter the discussion. The universe will be ripping the covers off the shameless. As we survive the potential hardship of Chiron and Taurus, we will see the guilty and shameless be exposed for all to see. And that's where we are now. We are in a 7-year period with Chiron, actually 8, including the retrogrades, with Chiron and Taurus. It includes what I would call a type of revelation. And the revelation that we're seeing has to do with like the emperor having no clothes. That the people who act from a place of shame will be reduced to shameless. The people who act from shamelessness will be reduced to having to deal with shame. It will happen. We will see it. And Chiron and Taurus is going to be the aspect that will make it manifest. It's the way it is. Now, how does that affect those of you who have character, who are truthful, who are congruent, who do not practice shame in your life or shaming other people. Well, you'll be ahead of the game. I can tell you that much, right? You will be ahead of the game. You don't really have anything to worry about. Like if you've been keeping things real, and your spirit is not corrupt, you'll be fine. You will be fine. You don't have from that perspective, you don't have anything to worry about. From a larger perspective, in terms of money and resources, with Chiron and Taurus, that's where things get tricky. And I think for some people, even if you have lived a life where you've done all the right things and you've paid your bills and you've been a good like citizen, or you've been a good American, or whatever country you're living in, right? That can help you in a public sense, but in a private sense, if the economy is going sideways, it's not always going to bail you out. So I think, though, however, you will have a market advantage over people who don't have that. So if you've gone through tough times and you've been able to weather the storm through tough times, you'll be better off. You'll be much better off, because you'll have been weathered a bit. And people who haven't done it, and people who have cheated and took shortcuts and hacks and kind of lied their way through, they're going to have a very, very, very hard time, extremely hard time as we go through this process, right? Because one of the first things Chiron is doing is just squaring Pluto. Like we're in a Chiron Pluto square. Like that, is that not revealing? And this Chiron Pluto square is going to go on for quite a while. So I think that's another major component here. I could see people like Jason Arday. We talked about what's his name, Perez Hilton, as being a canary in the coal mine last week over on 15. Jason Arday is kind of like a canary in the coal mine. He's not the first person who's going to be outed. Like he's not. There are plenty more to come. Plenty more to come. And I think some of the revelations will be kind of jaw-dropping. Really? This guy? This woman? I think it's probably the best strategy in dealing with this is, I would say, to be humble, be thankful, be grateful for what you have. I think that's important. That's really, really important. I don't know, what I feel in the Chiron and Taurus, one of the vibes I get is like really desperate. I get a feeling of a lot of desperate people, and a lot of desperate people who are willing to do things that they normally wouldn't do. And that gets us into shameless territory again. I have like visions of the Weimar Republic and stuff like that. It's kind of how I could see things going. I think probably what we'll need with Chiron and Taurus is, I would say, kind of a radical form of sharing and helping each other, because the inclination will be to hold on to every little scrap you have, because you never know when you're going to get another one. It kind of feels like that's in the air, but that's not going to be the right position to take. The right position to take is going to be, okay, without being like a complete and utter fool and practicing white European genocide. But I do believe that looking around and seeing where you and other people can sort of pool resources together with Chiron and Taurus can be very important. Very, very important. So that we, this is going to be going on for 8 years. So we have to get through this Chiron and Taurus. This is this is one of the weaker parts of Chiron as it relates to material goods, right? And there are going to be some people, and we're seeing it, who will be profiting off of crises and other people's misfortune. That's going to happen. It will happen. And for a lot of people, it's going to leave a very bad taste in their mouth. And the gap between the haves and the have-nots, I think, is going to become greater and greater and greater. And if the treatment of the sailors on the USS Lincoln is any indication of how the rest of these troops are being treated, I think the United States government has a real problem on their hands. A real problem on their hands. Because soldiers are loyal. They'll be loyal. But after a certain point, you're going to lose their loyalty and you're going to lose their morale. And you don't want to lose these people if it gets really clear that things are headed south in this country, because you know which side they'll side with. They will side with the people. It's really funny when I think of the Russian Revolution, I think of this one ship, the SS Potemkin. And the SS Potemkin plays a huge role in the Bolshevik Revolution because they wind up, the Russian Navy takes possession of this and they break, right? They break from the Tsar and they have their cannons basically trained on Leningrad, and they become a major piece in the revolution. And it has to do with this one ship. And as a result of this, the Bolsheviks are able to come in and eventually seize power from the government that was set up by Kerensky for a very brief period of time. And I think of the USS Lincoln in a very similar fashion, right? Like, it's not sitting off the coast of Leningrad, which is what, St. Petersburg, with the guns, but there is something very similar to it. And we just came out of, on Friday, we just came out of Mars at 0 Cancer, and the Sabian symbol for Mars at 0 Cancer is a ship at sea lowers its flag and raises another. And I just keep thinking about the USS Lincoln as it relates to that Sabian symbol. And right now it's flying an American flag, obviously. And we expect it to fly an American flag. But could it, at some point, be replaced by a different kind of flag? And not even one that's on the mast, but an internal flag that the guys on the ship are now literally, sort of secretly flying, which is, we're over this. You got to keep your eyes on like a mutinous situation, especially with Mars and Cancer, and even with Neptune and Aries retrograde. And all that Aries stuff is retrograde now, and it feels like orders and plans and all those things that might have worked for a while post February 27th. They're not working the same way now. Not with those retrogrades. Like, it's not business as usual. Like, Trump just can't pound his fist and tell them we got to deploy longer, and tell them to stick a line in the ocean and go fishing. It's not going to work. Not with these retrograde planets. It's going to be interesting. Like we've painted ourselves into a corner there, and not just a corner in terms of the operation. That's a different corner. It seems to me that the commander-in-chief has painted our troops, our sailors, into a corner. Like they have no other option than just stay there until the duration of when they're supposed to come back, no matter what condition they're in. That's painting them into a corner. Anyway, this is all Chiron and Taurus territory. And it's really, really interesting to see it at work, right? To see it at work, just to just step back and just watch what a shameless world we live in, you know, and how they just shamelessly lie. Like lie. Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, anybody pretty much within the Trump administration is lying through their fucking teeth. The media lies, the influencers lie. Like just, you know, and it's just shameless. It is shameless. All the way down to the street level. All the way down into going in and destroying a fucking, you know, I don't know, Wendy's, because you have to pay for extra sauce. That's all shameless. Anyway, I'm not sure how much more I have to add. This has all just been about Chiron and Taurus and just kind of a meditation on like sort of, and this whole Jason Arday and Andrew Wilson thing are very interesting. They're very interesting counterpoints. The shame that Andrew Wilson doesn't give a shit. He's making money. He'll just tell everybody he wins. He'll get enough people and influencers to repeat the fact that he won, and he's on to the next thing, and he's taking TPUSA's money, and he's completely and utterly shameless. And meanwhile, Jason Arday busted, and his shame ate away at him to the point where he ended his life. There's no information on how that happened. I'm assuming since he was in England, he wasn't going to shoot himself because they don't have guns. Could he have stabbed himself? Maybe. Could he have OD'd on something? Possibly. I'm thinking he probably hanged himself. Could be wrong, but he's got Sun conjunct Algol by 8 degrees, 6 degrees. That's a conjunction. So I'm not sure how much more I have to add. So all you people out there that have Chiron and Taurus, it's your time. Your time. Why don't we talk a bit about our sponsors here before we get out of here? Let's see. Let's do a little shout out for our guys Ray and Dean over there at Silver Botanicals. And Silver Botanicals is your place to get some of the best nano silver products that are available. And you've only got 6 days left to take full advantage of this sale. When you go to Silver Botanicals, type in Liam, when you check out, you will get 20% off of all of their products. That includes free shipping, by the way. And they have some really, really great products there. Check out their oral care series. We had a really big promotion a few months ago, but everything there is 20% off. Just type in Leah when you check out. Of course, True Hemp Science is another sponsor, and Chris is doing a mighty fine job keeping up production there. We got a little moonlight. Wonder what happened if I took a moonlight. Maybe I'm going to take a moonlight right here. Right here. Here we go. This is the True Hemp Communion. Right there. Man, I can taste the terpenes. This is good. This is good. I'm going to sleep well tonight. All right. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Hit the like if you like the show. Subscribe if you're new. You can buy me a cup of coffee. Join Locals, because next Monday we will have our next class over on Locals for Astrology, all because of the book, The Celestial Blueprint, which is available in hardcover and softcover on Amazon. The link for that is also in the show notes, and people really like it. I think it's a really good book. If you're new to astrology, you'll dig it. If you have some experience, you'll dig it. It's in that sweet spot right in the center that you'll find, I believe, to be both educational and entertaining. All right. And with that, thank you all for being here. Have a blessed night, week. Love you all. Treat each other well. God bless. And bye for now.